Blake winced as Grandpa Samuel arrived in his ancient military uniform, whispering to his bride, "Couldn't he just wear a normal suit like everyone else?" The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hyatt Ballroom sparkled above meticulously arranged tables adorned with custom floral arrangements, costing more than most people's monthly rent. Blake Thompson, rising star at Goldman Sachs and today's groom, subtly adjusted his Tom Ford bow tie while scanning the perfect reception he'd spent months planning. "He's here," whispered Jessica, Blake's bride, her Vera Wang gown rustling softly as she nodded toward the entrance. Blake turned and immediately felt his jaw tighten. His grandfather Samuel shuffled in wearing his decades-old military dress uniform instead of the custom tuxedo Blake had arranged. The worn olive green fabric stood out jarringly against a sea of modern black tuxedos and designer gowns. Jesus, couldn't he just wear a normal suit like everyone else? Blake muttered through a forced smile. "That thing looks like it belongs in a museum, not my wedding." Jessica squeezed his arm sympathetically. "It's important to him, Blake. He's from a different generation." "That's the problem," Blake replied, watching his grandfather stop to formally shake hands with the doorman. "He's stuck in 1953. This is exactly why I didn't want him giving a speech. He'll bore everyone with ancient war stories that nobody cares about." Samuel spotted them and straightened his posture with military precision despite his 89 years, offering a formal nod that Blake reluctantly returned. The old man's weathered face broke into a smile that transformed his stern features, revealing glimpses of the young soldier he once was. 2 weeks before the wedding, Blake had visited his grandfather's modest home for what he'd planned as a quick conversation. "Grandpa, the wedding planner needs to finalize the decorations," Blake said, accepting the 2 strong coffee Samuel always served. "She mentioned you requested space to display some flag?" Samuel nodded, his movements economical as he sat across from his grandson. "My unit's colors. I carried it in Korea with Baker Company, 7th Regiment. Thought it might be nice by the guest book." Blake winced internally. "It's just that we have a very specific aesthetic planned. Modern, clean lines." Jessica's hired an Instagram-famous designer who's created this whole minimalist concept. "I see," Samuel said, his expression unchanged. "Plus, it might be a bit much. Not everyone relates to military stuff, you know? Some guests might even find it political." Samuel's eyes, still sharp despite his age, studied his grandson. "Nothing political about remembering fallen friends, son." Blake checked his Apple Watch. "Look, what if we compromise? Maybe display it at the rehearsal dinner instead? The main event will have photographers for Vogue and..." "Vogue?" Samuel asked, the term clearly unfamiliar. "It's a magazine, Grandpa. Important for Jessica's influencer brand. The wedding needs a certain look." Blake sighed. "The flag just doesn't fit the vision." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then nodded once. "I understand." But Blake recognized the look on his grandfather's face. The same expression he'd worn at Blake's college graduation, when Blake had been too busy with friends to introduce him to professors, or at his work promotion party, when Blake had seated the old man at a back table. Later, at the wedding rehearsal, Blake overheard his mother trying to console Samuel. "He doesn't mean anything by it, Dad. Blake's generation just sees things differently." "No need to explain, Margaret," Samuel replied, his voice soft but dignified. "The boy's entitled to his day his way." Blake felt a twinge of guilt, but quickly suppressed it. This was his wedding, after all, his moment. And $200,000 didn't buy a reception that looked like a VFW hall. The wedding reception was in full swing when Blake noticed his grandfather talking to 3 elderly men at a corner table. They weren't on the seating chart. Blake had carefully placed Samuel with family, not wanting him to feel isolated. Yet somehow the old man had found these 3 strangers who, judging by their posture and dated suits, were likely military acquaintances. "Who are those guys with your grandpa?" Blake's best man asked, following his gaze. "No idea," Blake muttered. "Probably some ancient war buddies he invited without telling me." The DJ announced dinner service, and Blake made his rounds greeting important guests. His managing director, Jessica's father's business partners, and the social media influencers Jessica had insisted on inviting. He deliberately left the corner table for last. As he approached, Samuel attempted to introduce his friends. "Blake, I'd like you to meet James Davis, Thomas Chun, and Robert Washington. We served." "Great to meet you," Blake interrupted, shaking hands quickly. "Thanks for coming. I need to borrow my grandfather for a moment." Leading Samuel away, Blake spoke in a low, tense voice. "Grandpa, who are these people?" "They weren't on the guest list. They were in town for our veterans reunion," Samuel explained. "I hope it's not a problem. They won't stay long." Blake sighed. "You should have asked. We're paying per plate, and the seating arrangements took weeks to plan." Samuel's eyes flashed briefly with something, hurt perhaps or disappointment, before his military discipline reasserted control. "I apologize for the inconvenience." When dinner concluded, the MC called for toasts. Blake's father spoke about legacy and family. Jessica's mother told embarrassing childhood stories. Then, unexpectedly, the microphone was passed to Samuel. Samuel stood straight back despite his years. "I'll keep this brief," he began, his voice steady. "I wanted to share a story about duty and commitment from my time in Korea." Blake quickly stood and reached for the microphone. "Thanks, Grandpa, but we're running behind schedule. Maybe save that story for brunch tomorrow." He smiled for the crowd, adding, "You know how these old military guys can talk." The comment drew polite laughter, while Samuel quietly returned to his seat. The wedding coordinator rushed toward Blake, her professional composure visibly shaken. "Mr. Thompson, we have a situation," she whispered urgently. "There's a military helicopter landing in the hotel's East Garden." "A what?" Blake stared at her. "That's impossible. The East Garden is where we're taking sunset photos in 20 minutes. I'm aware of the schedule, sir, but there are military personnel setting up some kind of receiving area. They say they have clearance from hotel management." Before Blake could respond, the ballroom doors opened and a hotel manager entered, looking both nervous and excited. He approached Blake and spoke in a hushed tone. "Mr. Thompson, I apologize for the interruption, but we have an extremely distinguished guest arriving. General John Martinez, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is here with an official delegation from Washington." Blake blinked in confusion. There must be another event they're looking for. "No, sir. They specifically asked for this reception and for Master Sergeant Samuel Thompson." As if on cue, a formal honor guard of 6 soldiers in full dress uniform entered the ballroom. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as guests turned to stare. The soldiers positioned themselves at the entrance, standing at perfect attention. A moment later, a tall, imposing man with 4 stars on each shoulder of his immaculate uniform strode in, followed by 2 aides carrying an official-looking wooden case and a framed document. The entire room fell silent as the general scanned crowd, his gaze settling on Samuel, who had risen to his feet, standing with the same military bearing despite the 60-year difference in their ages. "Master Sergeant Thompson," the general called out, his authoritative voice filling the ballroom. Samuel stepped forward, offering a crisp salute that belied his years. "Yes, sir." General Martinez returned the salute with equal formality. "Master Sergeant Samuel Thompson, on behalf of the President of the United States, I'm here to correct a 70-year oversight." Blake stood frozen, champagne glass in hand, watching as the wedding he had meticulously planned was suddenly transformed into something he didn't recognize or control. The confused murmurs of guests provided a backdrop to his own bewilderment as all eyes shifted from him, the groom, to his grandfather, now the center of attention. General Martinez stood before the wedding guests, his commanding presence drawing every eye in the room. Many of you know Master Sergeant Thompson as a grandfather, a father, a friend. The general began. "What you may not know is that in December 1950, during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in North Korea, then Corporal Thompson performed acts of valor that stand among the most courageous in American military history." The general nodded to an aide who opened a laptop, projecting black and white photographs onto the reception hall's screen originally intended for wedding slideshows. The images showed a frozen, hellish landscape of snow-covered mountains and young soldiers with 1,000-yard stares. When his company was ambushed and cut off in the main division, Corporal Thompson, despite being wounded himself, made 3 separate trips across exposed terrain under heavy enemy fire to rescue 16 wounded men. When ammunition ran critically low, he navigated behind enemy lines to reach a supply drop, returning with essential provisions that allowed the company to hold their position until reinforcements arrived. The ballroom remained utterly silent as the general continued. For 5 days, with temperatures reaching 40 below zero, Thompson organized the defense of their position, administered first aid, distributed rations, and maintained morale. His actions directly saved the lives of 42 American servicemen. Blake stared at the photographs, trying to reconcile the young soldier in the grainy images with a grandfather he dismissed as irrelevant. He glanced at Samuel, who stood at attention, eyes fixed forward, his expression revealing nothing. Due to administrative errors and the chaos of wartime record-keeping, Thompson's Distinguished Service Cross recommendation was misplaced. His actions warranted our nation's highest military honor, but until recently, the full account of his heroism remained buried in classified reports. The general motioned to his aide, who stepped forward with a wooden case. Master Sergeant Thompson, by order of the President of the United States and by act of Congress, it is my distinct privilege to present you with the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest military decoration. The aide opened the case, revealing the medal on its blue ribbon. Gasps rippled through the wedding guests as the significance registered. Blake heard Jessica whisper beside him, "Oh my God, Blake, do you know what that is?" General Martinez removed the medal and, with ceremonial precision, placed it around Samuel's neck. Then he read from the framed citation, detailing acts occurred so extraordinary they seemed impossible for quiet, unassuming man Blake had known his entire life. When the general finished reading, he faced Samuel and rendered a formal salute. "On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your extraordinary heroism and selfless service." Every military veteran in the room, including Samuel's 3 friends, the hotel security director, and several wedding guests whose service Blake had never known about, stood and saluted in perfect unison. Then something unexpected happened. Jessica's father, a prominent business leader with no military background, slowly stood. Then Jessica's mother. Then Blake's parents. One by one, every wedding guest rose to their feet, an instinctive, spontaneous standing ovation that filled the ballroom with thunderous applause. Samuel, visibly moved for the first time, finally spoke. "This honor belongs to the men who didn't come home," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I accept it on behalf of Baker Company, especially the 23 who never saw their families again." Blake remained frozen in his chair, the only person still seated in the entire ballroom, as the magnitude of his misjudgment crashed over him like a wave. Blake finally stood on unsteady legs and made his way to his grandfather. The room quieted as he approached. For once in his life, Blake couldn't find the right words. His usual confidence abandoned him. "Grandpa, He began, his voice breaking. "I had no idea." Samuel looked at his grandson with the same patience he'd always shown. "No reason you should have. Son, it was a long time ago. But I should have asked. I should have listened." Blake's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I've been so disrespectful, so dismissive of everything about your life, your service." Samuel placed a weathered hand on Blake's shoulder. "Different generations speak different languages, son. That's all." Blake shook his head. "No, this is more than a generational gap. I was ashamed of you, of your old uniform, your military stories. I thought they were relevant." He looked around at the rapt faces of his wedding guests. "I couldn't have been more wrong." Blake turned to address the room, his voice gaining strength. "I planned everything about this wedding, every flower, every song, every minute. But the most important thing happened without my planning." He looked at his grandfather. "Would you share your story with us? The one you started earlier? I think we all want to hear it." Samuel nodded, and for the next 20 minutes, the lavish wedding reception was transformed as the old soldier spoke of loyalty, sacrifice, and brotherhood. He talked about young men from farms and cities across America who faced unimaginable hardship together. Not once did he highlight his own actions. Instead, he remembered friends lost, promises kept, and lessons learned. When he finished, Blake retrieved the flag Samuel had wanted to display, the unit colors he'd kept for 70 years, and placed it prominently beside the wedding cake. As the night concluded, Blake stood with his arm around his grandfather, both men looking at the flag now illuminated by spotlights. The greatest heroes, Blake reflected aloud, are often the quietest among us. They don't seek recognition. They simply fulfill their duty. Samuel nodded. And sometimes the most valuable things we inherit aren't material possessions, but the values that define us. This wedding story spread rapidly across social media, touching millions who recognized in it a deeper truth, that hidden within our families may be extraordinary examples of courage we've never noticed, and that respecting our veterans means first taking the time to really see them. How many heroes walk among us unrecognized? How many of your family members have stories of service and sacrifice you've never heard? Share this story if you believe our veterans deserve to be seen, honored, and truly understood. Leave a comment about a veteran who has touched your life, and subscribe to hear more stories that remind us of the extraordinary courage in ordinary lives.